Welcome to the Reclaim Project podcast with Sean. In part one of this two-part episode, Holly Deane-Johns shares her gripping story of adversity, fortitude, and redemption. With a normal childhood in an affluent area, a shift in family dynamics in her early teens was a pivotal point in her life's path. Narrowly escaping a death sentence, Holly was sentenced to 31 years imprisonment for heroin trafficking in the notorious Lardyao women's prison, nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton. Serving a harrowing 7.5 years of her sentence in Thailand, Holly was eventually transferred to Lardyao Prison in Perth, Western Australia. This is her story.
Holly, thank you so much for joining me today. Your story is it's a compelling story of human resilience, of adversity, of fortitude. It's a very compelling story, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. You spent 7 years of a 31-year sentence in one of a notoriously rough Thai prison. Mm-hmm. But we'll get into that side of the story in a little while. Where I want to start is little Holly in Perth, growing up in the suburbs, Mount Lawley, I believe, you lived in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're one of 5 kids?
Yep.
Yep. What was that family dynamic like?
So I consider myself to have grown up in a normal household, whatever that means to people.
Yeah.
Up until my parents separated when I was about 12. I'll go back a bit. My parents had a real estate agency for a long time. That ended up closing down. I'm not sure why. But after that, my mother got into running escort agencies from the home. So
From the family home?
From the family home, yeah. So my mother had 3 separate phone lines. So the girls would start working at about 6 in the evening. They could work any time really, up until 4, 5 in the morning. So these phones were constantly ringing. The women were constantly coming in and out of our home to drop money off, stuff like that. So due to this, I didn't really want friends to come over and play after school and stuff like that, because how can you explain 3 ringing phones in the house? That's just not normal.
How old are you at this stage?
11.
11.
11, yeah.
And you were well aware of what
yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, we all were.
Right.
So on the odd occasion that I did have somebody over, I'd say that my parents had an import-export company, which would explain why the phone would be ringing late at night. So that's how I explain that. My father was an alcoholic. When he would drink, he would bash my mum. This would never be done in front of us kids. It would be done behind a closed door, but we could still hear everything that was going on.
Yeah.
We'd see the aftermath. So, this was a very constant happening in the home. So, that was another reason why I didn't want people over, just in case my dad was, in one of these moods or, that sort of thing. I didn't want people to know what was happening at home, and I didn't tell anybody. In our family, it was sort of known that what happens at home stays at home. You don't talk about it to anybody. So I never did. They decided to separate when I was 12. My father was going back to Melbourne, which was where he was from, and we had the choice whether to go with him or stay with Mum. We all chose to stay with Mum. The reason I wanted to stay with Mum was because my father was very strict. Now, as a teenager, I don't want to be with somebody that's strict. My mum was the biggest softie you'd ever meet.
Right.
So I could get away with murder with my mum. So, as a teenager, you don't want rules, and that's what my dad would have had. Yeah. So, we all decided to stay with Mum. Looking back now, I wish I hadn't. I wish I had gone with Dad.
Really?
Yeah, because I would have had a totally different life, I believe. So when I was about 14 or 15, she started going out with a guy who at the time we had no idea he was a heroin addict and he'd been in and out of prison. Now, we'd never known anybody that used drugs. We'd never seen drugs. Oh, actually, I used to smoke a lot of pot when I was about 14, but that was the extent. So a few months into their relationship, it came out that this guy used heroin. He'd been in jail. It all came out now. Yeah.
So even with the escort agency, all the girls that were employed, they were all all clean?
That was one rule that my mother had. Anybody that worked for her,
Yep.
she didn't want anyone that used drugs, didn't want anyone that drank.
Yeah, right.
Like, totally
Wow.
clean.
Yep, yep.
So, yeah, my mother started snorting heroin after being with this guy for a few months, yeah. And then, you know, over a period of time, every single one of us kids became heroin addicts, and we all at one time or another ended up in jail. All of us. So having that guy in my mum's life, that was the beginning of the end for all of us.
This heroin, was it readily available in the house?
Yeah.
And you all just experimented and then...
What ended up happening was my mother was very wealthy. So heroin was always at home.
Right.
There was always a supply of it. So due to that, we never saw any downside to it, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah, I do, yeah.
Yeah, if you don't have money, then of course you're going to be out there maybe stealing or robbing houses,
Yeah.
whatever you're going to do.
Yeah.
But that wasn't an issue for my mum. She had money.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what this guy was attracted to as well, the money, you know. I would ask my mum very often if I could have a snort and try it, and she always said no, until she didn't. She said yes one night. I had a snort, loved it. I loved the feeling it gave me. But that night was the only night that my mum thought that I tried heroin. She didn't know.
She didn't know.
So I kept using it, I think probably for about a year and a half, 2 years. Nobody knew I was using.
Just accessing it from the supply at home.
Yeah. I wasn't losing weight. My weight stayed constant because I still ate normally. I was a functioning heroin addict. So, yeah, I kept it hidden for a very long time.
You're still going to school, you're still doing the things.
At that time, I'd left high school.
Yep.
So, yeah, my mother at one time she actually thought I was having a nervous breakdown or something because my mood started to get very erratic. She sent me away to Port Hedland to stay with a girlfriend of mine for a couple of weeks. She said, look, get away, you know, bit of time out, away from family and, you know, rah, rah, rah. I said, okay. I didn't want to go, but I did it for Mum.
And this is you were around 15 years old?
Probably about 16, about then. Yeah, so I hid whatever heroin I had in the garden in my mum's house. I went away to Port Hedland. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'll go there and dry out. After 2 days there, I was like, there's no way I'm staying here. Like, what a shithole. Like, it was a shithole. So, yeah, I jumped on a bus, went back home. My mother found out I had left. She rang to talk to me, and my girlfriend said, oh, she's left. Oh. So, yeah, my mum rang me and said, you know, what's going on? Yeah, I said, look, I couldn't stay there. I'm back. I went and dug up the heroin that I had there and started using again.
Did you go back to Hedland after that?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
So that's when your mum discovered that you're using?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's when it all came out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, look, even growing up for me, you know, with Mum being a heroin addict and stuff like that, I, a lot of the time, had to sort of play the role as Mum. You know, I'd get the kids up for school. I'd make their lunches. A lot of the time, Mum wasn't capable.
Were you the eldest?
No, I was the middle. I had two older brothers.
Middle. Okay.
So I was never really a typical teenager. I always had to act a lot older than I actually was. Like, I was going to nightclubs when I was 14.
Wow.
With my brothers and, you know, I was living an adult life.
Yeah.
When I think back about my adolescence, you know, my girlfriends always used to say, oh, your mum's so cool. I wish my mum was like your mum. And as a teenager, I loved hearing that.
Yeah, of course.
You know, everyone wanted to be at my house, you know, because it was always fun and all that type of thing, which it was. But, you know, as an adult looking back, I shouldn't have had that sort of relationship with my mother. Like, we were more like best friends. We weren't mother and daughter. We didn't have that relationship. But at the time, it felt so right. You know, there were no boundaries in place, which I loved as a teenager. But it was
the fact there was no boundaries.
There was no boundaries. You know, a teenager doesn't want boundaries.
Yeah. Whereas, like you said before with your dad, there were strong boundaries.
Strong boundaries. You know, and that's what I say to people now. You know, If you sort of have that relationship with your kid, think twice about it, because you're not doing the kid any favours by having that. Yeah, it's great to, be mates and everything, but you've got to have boundaries.
Yeah.
You have to. You're a parent.
And then where to from there? So you left school. Were there any measures in place for rehab, or you just had free rein?
I went to rehab a couple of times, only because my parents wanted me to go. I didn't do it for me, I did it for them. I was quite happy living the life I was living. And as soon as I got out of rehab, I started using again.
Yeah.
Which was a no-brainer because I wasn't going for myself. I myself didn't want to stop.
And your siblings? Everyone was using?
Everyone was using. I went to jail when I was 20 on heroin charges. So I was away for 5 years. So in that 5-year period, my sister started using, my younger brother. So, 5 years I'm not home. So I don't really know really what's happening.
Okay. But in your teens, do you know if your older brothers were using at the same, like when you were in your teens, at that sort of 16?
Yes, they were using around that time as well.
And then, so all this time, the escort business, that continued, or after your dad had left?
Yes, continued after Dad left for a few years.
Yep.
Once my mum met this guy, the business continued for a long time, and then slowly, Mum started to lose everything. The business, So
he just let her dry, basically?
Let her dry, right? So to give you a bit of context of how we lived, my mother had Rolls Royces, Mercedes, huge amounts of jewellery. If Mum wanted to go out and buy a $5,000 dress, she would. Like, money was no object.
Yeah,
we lived in mansions until, this guy came on the scene, and slowly, everything just went. At the end, my mother went from living that life to living in a flat in a really bad part of Perth. She had no car. She had nothing. Absolutely nothing. I actually think my mother had a breakdown, for sure. Yeah, my mother's life at the end was a very hard life for her. She was on her own.
The mental state wouldn't have been great?
Not great.
No.
She was on the methadone program.
Yep.
So, this lady who'd had everything was getting on a bus every day to go into the city, get her methadone, get on a bus to go home to this horrible little flat. And at that time, I was still using drugs. I was a drug addict. I couldn't really do anything to help Mum.
Yeah.
And that's something I do. I feel guilty about that because, as a daughter, I should have been able to help Mum. But I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
It's
interesting that you felt that you had to take that responsibility on when you had two older brothers.
Yeah, but, my brothers weren't around all the time either.
Right.
They were in jail most of the time.
Okay, yeah.
And when they would get out, it was back on the merry-go-round of using again.
Yeah.
Robbing people. They couldn't help themselves either.
So at that time then, when you said your mum was forced to move into a flat, basically, so what happened with you and your siblings?
You're testing my memory here.
Yeah.
Around that time that all happened, I went to prison not long after that. So I was 20 when I went to jail on heroin charges.
On heroin charges, yeah.
When I was 21, I was called to the telephone in the yard to take a call. I knew it was bad news because that didn't happen unless it was bad news. Took a phone call and was told that my older brother Craig had gone around to see my mum. She hadn't been answering the door, which he knew was strange because she should have been home. He's kicked the door in and found Mum OD'd and dead. So my sister was in jail with me at that time.
Right.
We were given the choice to either go to the viewing of my mother's body or the funeral. We both chose the funeral. So we were both taken to the funeral, handcuffed to a screw, which was just horrible. Horrible way to go to a funeral for a start.
Absolutely.
But at least we could say goodbye.
Yeah.
That was really hard for all of us because Mum was our anchor. Mum was everything to us. It didn't matter what any of us did. It didn't matter what happened in our lives. Mum was always there for us. Like, my mother's love was unconditional. Like, it really was. There were no bounds. So, knowing that I would get out of jail and Mum wouldn't be there, that was really, really hard. because she was everything to us.
Yeah, of course. How long was your sentence that time?
At
When you were 20? Yeah.
Yeah, I had to serve a 5-year sentence.
That was 5. Yeah.
That was 5, yeah, and before being eligible for parole. So I got out after doing 5. I did 6 months work release at the Salvation Army shop. Once all my conditions were finished, I then went over to Thailand to be with my boyfriend, who was over there at the time on the run.
From Australian authorities?
Yeah.
Right.
So the charges that I was jailed for, he was wanted on the same charges. Gotcha. So because I'd got a 5-year sentence, my lawyer said, well, you've got 5, he'll get 15. So I got a message to him and I said, don't come back here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once I was able to travel, I went over there to be with him. You know, my boyfriend was a heroin addict as well. So being in Thailand as a drug addict was the place to be.
Why do you say that? Oh, accessibility or
Yeah, the best
quality?
Heroin in the world.
Oh, quality. Okay.
Quality,
Yeah.
cheap.
Really, yeah.
For a drug addict, man, that's just like, wow, this is
Yeah.
great. So yeah, for the next few years, I would travel back and forth. I'd come back to see family and friends, or to have hospital appointments, stuff like that. What I started doing is I had a guy in Thailand that used to do fake passports, licenses, all of that type of thing. So I got him to start making me up like rectangular calendars, and I'd get him to insert 15 grams of heroin into it. So this calendar was so thin, you would never even think that something was inside.
Yeah.
So I'd post these back to myself in Australia so that when I was at home, I had heroin to use.
Okay.
So I wasn't having to spend a fortune on heroin at home. I was, you know, the quality at home was shit.
Yeah.
So that's why I did it, so I wouldn't be sick.
So it was back and forth. You didn't stay in Thailand. You sort of...
No, I'd come back home a couple of times a year.
Yeah.
So yeah, at that time, there was my boyfriend and a couple of other Australian guys who had been living in Thailand for many years. They were on the run also from Australia.
Right.
So, you know, they all knew each other. One of these guys did a run from Thailand to Darwin. He had a kilo. He was busted in Darwin. He gave the cops me so he would get a reduced sentence. He said, I know someone I can give you in Thailand. She's doing this. So I was then put under surveillance by the Thai cops for 3 months. This was by both the Thai police and the Australian police. They collaborated with each other. So at that time, I was put under surveillance. Stephen then decided to do a run.
Stephen is your partner?
My partner. So he did a run from Thailand to Melbourne with a kilo. He got busted in Melbourne. His father rang me the next day. As soon as I heard his voice, I knew. Okay, he's busted.
So at the airport, like you said.
At the airport.
So he was well under surveillance. They knew he was coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I then decided to wrap things up in Thailand, move to Melbourne so I could visit Stephen and be support for him. That was what I was doing. So I started wrapping things up. I had 2 calendars left. I phoned my friend who lived at a different apartment and I said to him, can you come and pick me up and take me to the post office? He said, yeah, no problem. So he came, he waited in the car park of the post office. I went in, I picked up a letter that my dad had sent me and I posted this calendar. I got back in the car, I put the calendar in the glove box, intending to read it later.
Oh, the letter from...
The letter from Dad.
Yeah.
I asked my friend, you know, you hungry? Do you feel like something to eat? He said yes. I said, okay, go into the city, we'll get something to eat. It was that busy, there was nowhere to park. So I said to him, look, you keep chucking laps around the block, I'll get food and jump back in the car. I've got the food, he's pulled up, I've jumped in, gone to close my door. All these guys have run at the car. I thought we were getting robbed because you're always told...
Yeah, and these were
plainclothes
guys, yeah.
just looked like normal blokes. So yeah, I thought we were being robbed. So I'm playing tug of war with my door with this guy. He's trying to open it, I'm trying to close it, and I'm saying to my mate, go. There's nowhere to go, we're boxed in. So he gets pulled out, I get pulled out. He asked me if I'd been to the post office that night. I said no. So he drove me back there to get me ID'd. Guy ID'd me.
Post office, yeah.
They brought my mate into the post office as well, so we're both sitting there. And I said, don't worry. I said, you won't get arrested. I said, you didn't even come in with me. You waited in the car. And he said, it doesn't work like that here. He said, I'm fucked too. And I said, nah, no way. But he knew. He'd been in jail in Thailand about 10 years before.
Right.
So he knew the system.
Yep.
So, yeah, we were both taken back to our apartments. Now, on the way back to my apartment, the cops are asking me, what's your address? I said, I don't have an address. And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, I don't have an address. I stay with these friends for a few days. I couch surf, go and stay with these friends. They kept saying, you're lying. What's your address? Well, I'm not lying. I'm telling you, you know. As we're having this conversation, I realise we're going to my apartment. They knew. So we get to the apartment. They take me upstairs. All these pickup trucks have come as well. So we're in my apartment. There's cops searching everywhere. I've managed to get a bag of jewellery that I had in my bedside drawer. I'd managed to get that out and put it down the front of my jeans, which was really lucky because if they'd found it, I would never have seen it again. And I knew I'd be needing that jewellery because that's, you know, it's money. I had one other calendar hidden in a drawer and I had an ounce of heroin hidden in a speaker, in a stereo system.
Yeah.
That morning I'd undone it to have a shot. I'd put it back in, tried to do the screw up. There was no thread left on it.
Right.
And I thought, don't worry, I'll deal with that tonight when I get home, I'll fix it. So now I'm worried about the calendar.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm now worried
speaker.
about the speaker because I'm thinking as soon as I pick that up, the back's just going to fall off.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was freaking out. So one cop searched the drawer. He didn't find the calendar. So I was like, cool. That's okay, you know. Then another cop came and started searching that same drawer. So I've said, oh, no, your mate, he's already searched it. He didn't care. He kept looking and then he's gone.
And he found the calendar.
Oh, shit. Okay. So that's done. Now I'm worried about the ounce. The guy was mucking around with the stereo, picking it up. He, you know, sort of looked at the speaker, moved on.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, my God. Okay, cool.
Oh, wow.
Missed it. So they then started loading everything in that apartment onto pickup trucks,
Okay.
obviously to steal it.
Yeah.
So we've then been taken to a place called the Narcotics Suppression Bureau. We stayed there for about 2 hours, then we were taken to the lockup. In the lockup, there was a few women in the cell, but I couldn't work out if they were foreigners, Thais, I couldn't see their faces. They woke up about 6 a.m. and I realised there were 2 Russians, an Indonesian woman. That was it at that time.
Right.
So they started telling me, okay, this is what happens. You're kept here for about 2 weeks and then you're taken to the main prison. You go to court every 12 days there, which I thought was like, wow, every 12 days?
Yeah,
You're kidding. It was a lot.
That's excessive, yeah.
Yeah. So the first day we were taken to court, we were both really sick. We were hanging out. I remember sitting there, like I was dry reaching.
So how long had you been in the lockup before you went to that first court appearance?
A few days.
A few days.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what were those conditions like in the lockup?
Oh, really bad.
Really
It
bad,
was,
yeah?
Yeah, it was just a square concrete cell. That was it. And it had a toilet in the ground and a little tap. That was it. So...
And essentially it was, as the word indicates, a lockup.
It was
you
a lockup.
didn't leave.
No. The only time you'd leave the cell was if you were going to an interview. That was it. You're in there
Otherwise-
24/7. The lights were on 24/7. Don't get turned off. It was near an airport, so you're hearing planes going all night. It's not a good situation.
Yeah.
I remember this night, it was so strange. It was when the Olympics were on in Sydney. The head cop got one of his blokes to come and get me one night. And I'm thinking, where are we going? Like, it was about 8 o'clock at night, and I'm thinking, this is really weird.
Yep.
So they've handcuffed me, they've taken me into this guy's office. And I'm thinking, what's going on? And he's sitting there. He could only speak a little bit of English, but he said, you can watch the TV, Olympics.
Oh, really?
And I was like, what the fuck?
Okay.
It was really weird. Even though it was so strange, it was nice to be out of that cell. So I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, cool. I'll
Yeah.
sit here and watch the Olympics. Yeah, let me sit there for about half an hour.
Yeah.
It was really awkward.
Yeah.
But it was just nice to be out of that cell.
Of course, yeah.
Very, very strange.
That's bizarre.
Really bizarre. Yeah, then taken back into the cell. We were very sick, and we kept asking the cops for medicine. We need to see a doctor. And they would just laugh and say, if you want to use heroin, well, this is what happens. So when our embassy came, we said, look, we need a doctor. Like, we're really sick. So they got a doctor to come in, gave us medication, which the cops had to give us throughout the day. Now, I knew that all our stuff had been brought to the lockup from my house. So I said to Bob, my co-offender, who was in the next cell, I said, look, when the right cops are on, I'll ask if we can go and get a change of clothes and some toiletries. You distract the cops, I'll get the speaker and I'll get the gear out.
Yeah.
That was my plan. When we went into the room, the speaker wasn't there. Everything else was there except that. And I was like, oh my God, who has this speaker? Yeah. So for all the years I was in jail in Thailand, I always had that thought that maybe that will come back to bite me on the arse one day.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking the cops have stolen all my stuff. My stereo and this speaker could potentially be sitting in a copper's house right now.
Yeah.
And one day, the back's going to come
Yeah.
off. So that was always a real worry for me. Now, when they went back to search my friend's apartment, they found a gun, they found 110 grams of heroin, and he had methadone in some bottles in his fridge. There was a cop on one night and he went to talk to my mate and said, do you want to buy your methadone back? So Bob's yelled out to me and said, this is what's going on. Do you want to buy it back? And I said, yes. I said, buy it back. I said, we need it. Like, we're sick.
Yeah.
So he had a bottle, I had a bottle, and I said, look, don't just drink it to get out of your head, to get stoned. I said, just take little sips to get you through. So that's what we did. After 2 weeks, everyone had gone from the cells. Mm-hmm. Bob and I were still there. And I was like, why are we still here? Why are we kept longer? And the cop said, don't be in such a hurry to get over to the main jail, because once you're there, you'll wish you were here. But I didn't want to stay there because you're in the cell for 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
That you're stuck.
Yeah.
At the jail, even though I know it's jail, you're going to have more freedom there.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to walk around and talk to people.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted. So after a month, we went to court and we were told that evening we would go back to the prison, not back to the lockup. Mm-hmm. So as Bob and I heading down to the lockup at the courthouse, Bob said to me, look, when you go down there, you're going to freak out. He said, it's going to be like nothing you've ever seen before. And I just laughed. I'll be fine, don't worry, you know. He'd told me many stories about prison because he'd been in jail in Thailand before. But I really thought the stories he told me were over-exaggerated. I really did. They weren't exaggerated at all. We've both been taken to the top of a staircase. As you're walking down, it's getting darker and darker. Then you've got to the bottom and we're both taken opposite ways. I was then searched by a cop and then put in the cell. Now, I've walked in this cell. Again, it's just a concrete block. There were that many women in there. No one was sitting down. Everyone was standing up. There was no room to sit down. Crazy. I'm looking around, trying to find a foreign face. There weren't any. Then this chick walks over to me and introduced herself. She was Chinese. She'd already been in jail a few years by then, so she spoke like fluent Thai, great English. She came over and sort of said, okay, this is what's going to be happening. So I was with her pretty much from day one. We became very good friends over the many years. Yeah, and then we were taken to the actual prison.
Were you sentenced at this stage?
No.
Not yet. Okay.
I wasn't sentenced.
So it's still remanded?
I was on remand for 3.5 years. Yeah.
Really?
That was because Bob wouldn't plead guilty. Because we've been charged together, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't... I pled guilty.
Yep.
He pled not guilty. So because of that, they couldn't sentence me separately. They were putting us together.
Yeah.
And I said to Bob over and over and over, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Why are you drawing this out?
Yeah, because, I mean, he knows the system.
He knows the system. And he knows that there's no way he will be found not guilty if he fights the charges. We were caught cold.
Yeah.
There's no disputing that. So in my mind, I'm thinking, why are you doing this? We were told pretty much straight away about the transfer treaty that Thailand and Australia had. So we were told that when you get sentenced, if you get a number, which I did, I got a 31-year sentence. So that meant after I'd served 4 years, I could apply to transfer home. If you got a life sentence, you served 8 years before you can apply to transfer home. So I'm saying to him, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Once we hit 4 years, we can be out of here.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't care. He said, I'm fighting it. There's a chance that I could be found not guilty. I said, there's no chance. You're just drawing this out. He didn't care. So yeah, the first thing that was a real eye-opener to me was actually walking into the prison. It was just like, wow, this place is it was huge. It just looked like a concrete jungle. We were all searched. We all had our belongings gone through. We all then were told to line up. Mm-hmm. I can't remember how many women came in that night, but there was a lot of us. The line was huge. One by one, we were told to go into a room to be internally searched. Now, for me, this is normal because that's what happens when you go to jail. You get searched internally. So I've walked in. It wasn't a nurse or a doctor. It was a prisoner doing this. Yeah, that was my first, wow, are you kidding me? But that's just how it was.
Like one of their, trustees or,
So I know how many women have just gone in front of me into that room. So I know there should be a lot of gloves in that bin. I've looked in the bin before I've got on the table and I'm like, nah, this can't be happening. She's obviously used these gloves on a lot of people. I can't speak Thai at this time, but I'm motioning for her, take them off, put them in the bin and put new ones on.
Yep.
No hygiene, no nothing. So that was my introduction to jail.
I mean, apart from that shock with the crowd and the lack of hygiene, were there any thoughts of okay, my God, Holly, what have you gotten yourself into here, or that didn't come yet?
I should backtrack a bit because I did contemplate suicide in the lockup. After about a week in that lockup, I thought, you know what, I'm not doing this. I knew how bad it was in that lockup and I knew it was going to be 100 times worse at the jail. And I was like, you know what, I don't want to live my next 20 or 30 years like this. I don't want to do it. Yeah. Do it for what? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I was in a really dark mind at that time.
Were you able to call family or Stephen or anyone in that lockup?
This is how insane Thailand is. There was a phone on the wall outside the cells. Mm-hmm. One day the cop came around and he said, who wants to buy phone cards? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So I've bought a phone card, but I was that sick from hanging out. I couldn't even think about getting up and standing in the line to use the phone. I thought, you know what, I'll wait until I'm better, then I'll ring home. The day I was going to use the phone, the same cop who sold us the cards walked over to the phone, picked up the receiver and tore it off the phone. And I was like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. I was going to make the phone call today. So at that time, I just wanted to die.
Yeah.
I then thought of ways to do it because there's no privacy. Even when you're in the toilet, the concrete wall is only this high. So if you're on the toilet or in there trying to have a shower, just, with a little bowl and water, you can be seen. So I thought, okay, I'm either going to have to do it really late at night when everyone's asleep, because I used to shower at about 3 a.m. So that would not be out of the norm for them to think I was just having a shower. So I was thinking, okay, I could do that and slit my wrists and do it that way, or I could climb up onto the bars to the highest point and hang myself. So I was trying to work out which would be better. I thought hanging because that would be quick. So I was really going to do it.
Yeah.
Then the next day, I thought, what are you doing? You don't want to die.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
This is not who I am.
Yeah.
You know, the thought of my family getting a phone call from the embassy saying, your daughter has killed herself in a filthy, stinking cell. No way.
Yeah.
No, not doing that to
Yeah.
him. And I didn't want to die, man.
Of course, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, snapped out of it and, yeah, just sort of got on with it.
Thank you for listening. Join us for episode 2 as Holly continues her gripping story, right here on the Reclaim Project podcast. We look forward to your company next time.